would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which I live and work, the Gundagara land and people. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. I also want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which you, our listeners, are joining us from today. I recognise the deep connection that First Nations people have to this land, their enduring culture, and their commitment to the preservation and care for their country. This land was never ceded, and it always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Hey there, and welcome to Beyond the Surface, the podcast where we explore the stories of people who have survived religious trauma, left high control or cult communities, and are deconstructing their faith. I'm your host, Sam, and each week I'll talk with individuals who have taken the brave step to start shifting their beliefs that might have once controlled and defined their lives. Join us as we dig into their experiences, the challenges they've faced, and the insights they've gained. Whether you're on a similar journey or you're just curious about these powerful stories, you're in the right place. This is Beyond the Surface. Welcome, Janice. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you. And I say why, which is hello. I'm joining you from the traditional and unceded territory of the Seal people in the Okanagan Valley of what is now known as British Columbia, Canada.
Beautiful. I love when people open and honor the traditional land. When I usually ask people where in the world you are, and so I love when people honor the traditional landowners of where they are. So thank you so much for that. And thank you for joining me. I'm so excited for this conversation.
Well, me too. I mean, you're the closest that I've come to Australia, you and Dr. Josie McSkimming. So I'm hoping to make it
Oh,
out your way at some point. But in the
yeah.
meantime, this conversation will have to do.
Oh, we love Josie. She's on the advisory committee of the Religious Trauma Collective that I co-found. So we love Josie. She's such a wonderful voice in this space. So that's a pretty good reference for Australia. We don't get
Nice.
much better than Josie, so we love that.
Mhm,
Um,
mhm.
okay, I like to start these episodes with a very broad, very vague question that allows you to choose where we start. So, where does your story start?
My story starts growing up a little girl in Canada in a Pentecostal family. So my parents were Pentecostal Christians. They got saved, got my air quotes going for anybody who's just listening. They got saved while they were traveling around the world in their mid 20s before they had any children. And they would have already considered themselves, they thought back then basically that Canada was a Christian nation and never really thought too much more about it. But boy, oh boy, there was a street preacher and they got saved. And so then I was born into that family. And so I grew up with my parents speaking in tongues, anointing my head with oil when I was sick. They were loving and like all people had some issues as well, but so I grew up believing that the and being taught that the Bible was the inerrant word of God, holy scripture for all time. All the stories were true, they weren't just metaphors.
Mhm.
And then I watched my older siblings step away from the faith one by one. I saw how much it hurt my parents, and I determined I would never cause that kind of hurt. Of course, I'm the only one now that's went on and wrote a book about my whole deep.
I was like, for the people who are listening, Janice has a book behind her called Divorcing Religion, which is probably going to tell you a lot about where this episode is headed.
Surprise! Yeah.
Ah, um, I feel like quoting it's probably a random reference, but there's a character in Doctor Who that goes spoilers, and so I feel a little bit like that's what we just did. Um,
Yes.
so what was like, what do you remember about growing up in that space? What did you think about the speaking in tongues and I mean, Pentecostal spaces are big, charismatic. Um, I have people who have never stepped foot in a church who go, they're the batshit crazy Christians. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, what was that like for you to grow up in?
Well, my parents' version of Pentecostal, because there are lots of different versions of Pentecostal, wasn't like the super uptight fundamentalist wear head covering, wear long dresses, that sort of thing. That didn't come till later. My parents didn't push that, but they, Sundays were for church,
Yeah.
and we would often have people over from church, especially on Sunday afternoons. Any single people. It was in the time of the Jesus People movement. This is before your time. This was in the 1970s. And so these hippies, these barefoot hippies would show up in the church. And my mom is a very loving, very kind-hearted woman. So she would insist that all the strays come over to our place after
Mhm.
for lunch. And so it was lively and fun. And I loved the music, always loved the music and the singing. And I am very musical to this day. And I think that's where my love of music began. And in fact, one of my earliest memories is standing up on a pew in between my parents. A pew is the bench that everybody sits on. In between my parents and my mom holding the hymnal out. And this was before I could even read. I was looking in there and just pretending, following along. And I felt such love in there. It wasn't a place with a lot of hellfire and damnation.
Mm.
So I feel like I really lucked out on that aspect. And then as I became a teenager, and I really sort of adopted the faith and made it my own. And that's when I started going to a different Pentecostal church from my parents at that point. They would bounce around because my dad was a fundamentalist and also he was a narcissist. And so he would often get into disagreements and believe that the pastor was misinterpreting and that only he had the right. And so they would go from church to church. And so I just kind of found my own Pentecostal church and stuck with that. But then I really socially, that was my place. I joined the choir and the drama and the youth group, and I was always in a public school. My parents didn't have the money to send us to private Christian school. So I remember also feeling like a fish out of water and feeling like I had to witness to my poor friends who are going to hell. And
Yep.
so earnest about it, but also recognizing, I'm as I got into junior high, like I'm not going to be invited to any parties, like nothing, because I am just the biggest goody two shoes around, always ready to report if I smelled something, if I heard someone was going to have a fight or anything like that. I
Yeah.
was furious. I felt like that was the role that I was supposed to play. So it earned me the nickname of the constable. And that's just kind of how I rolled. But it eventually got uncomfortable as I couldn't help but try and save the junior high kids around me, and they didn't take kindly to it. They thought it was obnoxious, which it was.
Mm-hmm.
Having fun living their lives, and then here I come in my shirt with the big Bible verses on it and everything, and all kind of stuff like that. So then there was bullying that started to happen, and of course, like a good devout fundamentalist Christian, I took that as being persecuted
Yeah, you're
for
a martyr
Jesus'
now.
sake. Yep, that's right. That's right. Boy, I'm going up and up. Yes. So then rather than taking a step back and looking at, oh, am I contributing to this situation in any way? It's just like, nope, there, it must be, it's all about Jesus. And so then I contacted some of the nuttier folks from the church that I was a part of, and they decided we needed to have a march for Jesus around the school, march around seven
Oh.
times like the walls of Jericho. And we're marching and praying and casting out Satan. And I believed it. And now I'm on this side of things. I'm like, wow, that
Yeah.
that is extreme
I mean,
because
I'm
we radicalized.
I'm laughing because like 15-year-old me would have been marching right alongside of you.
You'd be holding up a
Yeah.
sign. Yep.
We had like a once a year thing in our high school where all of the Christians in the public school put on a thing to serve the rest of the school as good Christians did, and I was the person who walked around with the megaphone, so I absolutely would have been right alongside you. Um, Okay, so throughout all of this time, like who was God to you? Like personally?
Yeah, very, very personal. And this is a big, I feel like this is a difference maybe between Pentecostal or evangelical Christians and some other varieties. So it was very much me oriented in the sense of it was all about my relationship
Yeah.
with Jesus.
Yeah.
And so I prayed, quite routinely every day. I had a long prayer list, read my Bible, wrote down the scriptures, memorized them. Like even in the church groups, I was very, I'd be sitting at the front taking my notes, as you probably did too. And of course, in religious circles, the more extreme one gets, the
Yeah.
more one is lauded and praised for their commitment
Mm.
to Jesus and
Yeah.
to the kingdom. So I wasn't receiving feedback that, sister, you're tipping over, like you're going way off the deep end. There was nothing like that. It was just I was being praised for it.
Yeah.
But at one point, the bullying did become too much. I remember near the end of my grade 9 year. And so I decided that I wanted to change schools.
Mm.
And so I forged my mother's signature on a piece of paper to transfer me. And I decided, well, if the forgery is accepted, it's holy forgery. It's
Hmm.
God working. Whatever you have to tell yourself, right?
We make it
And
make
sure,
sense.
it was accepted. That's right. And so then in grade 10, I started at a different school, and I decided maybe I'd kind of cool my religious jets a little bit and just see how it went if I wasn't quite so pushy about it. Although we did have to do a science presentation that year, and I decided to do mine on abortion and how I had read all these pamphlets from Last Days Ministries. I don't know if you guys have heard about them over in Australia. And they were very anti-abortion. So they put out all these tracts and pamphlets, and I had them and I put them all over this board and was talking about the evils of abortion and how awful it was. Now, in my innocent state at that time, it never even crossed my mind that I might have classmates who were sexually active or
Mm.
who had abortions. I
Yeah.
just thought I was warning them all for the future, in the future when you're married, or
Yeah.
whatever. And
Yeah.
so that was, and I remember my teacher being fairly horrified. But again, I was ready to any slings and arrows that came against me, I would just call them persecution.
Yeah.
But so that was kind of the only really overboard that I went that year. And I even was trying to fit in. I got invited to one party. I was so excited. One party. And I had my driver's license and the other kids didn't yet because I was older in the class. So I offered to be a designated driver
Mm.
because I understood there was going to be some drinking at the party. Sure enough, there was not by me, but
Because you're
if
setting
they,
an
I think
example.
that's right. That's right. And so then
Mm.
finally one of the girls that I had taken to the party, she says to me, we need to find so and so. She's really drunk. She's throwing up. She's not in a good way. We need to take her home. So we load her into the truck and we're driving home. And I wasn't used to driving this vehicle of my dad's, and I didn't know how to shift the high beams. And sure enough, police officer comes up the hill as I'm going down, and then I don't change my lights, and so he turns around and pulls us over. And I'm 16 years old. I'm very innocent. I've never been pulled over by the police. And I roll down my window and he says, "What have you been drinking?" I said, "This orange pop." See? And I stick out my tongue so he could see the orange. And he's like, "Get out of the car." And do my he does. Sure enough, the girl throws up in my dad's car. Just all this. It's just from bad to worse. But
Mm.
that was as I was kind of trying to reach into the secular world and see did I fit there. And so it was a lot of feeling uncomfortable and not being sure
Mm.
where I fit in. And I didn't want to disappoint my parents. I didn't want to disappoint God, but I was really tired of being a goody two shoes, and I wanted to have a boyfriend and
Yeah.
all those usual things. So it was hard.
Yeah.
It was awkward.
Yeah. I think one of the biggest things that people don't talk about enough is actually being It is hard to be a hardcore. I described myself as a hardcore black and white obnoxious Christian, right? Like I was
Yeah.
not, people did not like me. I was not a well, like my circle liked me because they were the same kind of people, but outside of that, not so much. It's hard being a Christian to be like the witness for Jesus in a public high school with a wide variety and diversity of kids around you, and the pressure that that puts on you because that's the role that you are supposed to play, but also you have this pull to be wanting to just do normal teenage
Be
things.
accepted. Yep. Exactly.
Yeah. Did you
Exactly.
notice
Yeah.
that as a pull in the moment, or do you look back at that and now know that that's what it was?
I think I was aware of it at the time too. So then when senior high school in Canada is grade 11 and 12. And so was attending a school in grade 11 and 12. And there was a young man who fancied me. And so we started dating, and he wasn't religious. He very occasionally came to church with me, but in the end, I chose the boyfriend over the religion. So I stopped going. And of course, then there's the purity culture indoctrination. We didn't call
Yes.
it that in the 80s, but that's what it was. And my mom had told me, a man, if he's a person's going to have sex with you, a man's going to have sex with you just because he can. Why buy the cow when you can get the milk for free? That was a big thing that I heard a lot. Mom, you're referring to me as a cow. I don't appreciate
Yeah.
it. But at the time, I didn't think that. So sure enough, I was unwilling to have any relations with him uh, until I was 19. And that's an adult in Canada. So we were out of high school by then. And I thought, okay, if anything does happen, I'm an adult and I can manage whatever happens. So sure enough, we're intimate with each other. And of course, it was like a huge letdown. Whatever we're taught that it's going to be, it's not that. So it's like a huge disappointment, a big letdown. But then, to my horror, this guy that I really loved and I'd been with for 3 years of my life broke up with me. That was it.
Oh.
And then I was like, I am the chewed gum. I am the cow that gave the milk for free.
Yeah, I imagine that just reinforced absolutely everything you had been told, which is that, you are just a vessel for guys to, get off and have sex with and go along to the next person.
Terrible. Yes. And then my self-esteem, of course, just plunged and plummeted and hit an
Yeah.
all-time low. So then I'm just drinking all the time. I'm in the bar every night like a barfly, trying to prove to myself I'm actually worth something. People do want to be with me, even though that one didn't. It was very, very messy. And also around that time, I started singing in different rock bands because I love music, very musical, as I said. And so in my city, I had the opportunity to join a rock band. And so I did. And that was lots of fun. But even that was uncomfortable because I'm up on stage with my fellow musicians singing heathen songs, belting them out. But feeling guilty about it, guilty, like even really wondering, oh, can I sing this song? Should I sing the song? And I certainly would not have said I wasn't a Christian at that time. I would have maybe said I was in a backslidden state or whatever. But
Okay.
so this goes on for years. And then in my 20s, I think 22 or 23, I had a back to Jesus moment. And it was very serious. And sure, don't we all? And so I attend this church service with an old friend, and it happened to be Communion Sunday, and you can't take communion unless you're right with Jesus. So I I apologized to God for every heathen thing that I've done, and would He take me back? And then I took the communion, and everything was amazing, and I felt renewed. And I went back home, and I told all my roommates, things are going to change around here. And I pulled down the fake penis off the wall, and I went with getting rid of all these things, whatever was around there,
Penis on the wall.
just on the corkboard, maybe. But it wasn't mine. But anyway, I decided, of course, then that it was completely inappropriate and it could not stay. And so eventually, of course, I ended up moving out of the very fun but very heathen house and just plunging myself absolutely back into the Pentecostal Christian world, and then moved back home, back to Kelowna with my parents. And uh, then my pastor introduced me to a young man. I guess they thought I was 23 and they probably thought I was going to become an old maid because there was like
Yeah.
nobody, I wasn't. And
Yeah,
so
I mean,
they
you should have
invited me
been
over to
married
their
with kids
place.
by that point.
I know, I
Yeah.
know. I was in college, and the 22-year-old and 20-year-old Christian kids around me were all getting engaged this one summer. I was like, what is wrong here? So they invited me over, and there were three eligible bachelors. Of course, I really liked Bachelor number two. He was lots of fun. But Bachelor number three, he met the requirements for me. He was tall. You got to have standards. He was tall. And then also, he took his faith very seriously. Number two was maybe just a bit too much fun. So I ended up with number three. And sure enough, yep, we had got married and started our holy family.
And
Went off
so
to Bible college.
I imagine if, and I'm actually drawing, as you're talking, I'm drawing so many parallels to my story as well. I imagine that after that back to Jesus moment, you went in full force, like you went in probably harder and heavier than you had before, because like that's usually what I see. That's what I did. And I imagine that Bachelor number three was the choice because I used to always have this slogan that whoever I chose needed to love God more than he loved me, right? Because
Yeah,
that was
similar
like
idea.
standard. Yeah.
hmm
Um,
hmm Yeah, he was very, very serious about his faith. He
yeah.
hadn't become a Christian until he was 18 or so, but he was very devout and very
Yeah.
sincere and a nice person too, but very kind of cerebral,
Mm,
like not super affectionate, so very different from me in some pretty
right.
significant ways. Um, and then after we had our first baby, he wanted to go to Bible college. So I thought, that's wonderful. That's perfect. So off we went. We were terribly poor, didn't have two nickels to rub together. We had just had baby number two at that time, like literally the baby was an infant. And we're off at this Bible college. And once we'd been there for a couple years, I started noticing when we would be in town, because like farming communities, these women would come into the grocery store and they would be wearing head coverings. And they always had like modest dresses and everything on. And I said to my very smarty pants husband at the time, now I call him my husband. I said to my husband, who, who, who are those? I didn't know they had Amish people uh, in Alberta. And he says, no, they're not Amish. They're a type of Mennonite. And I said, well, why are they dressing like that? Like, are we still supposed to be dressing that way? And he said, well, Paul does talk about it in the New Testament, and I don't see that there's been any excuse given for why women shouldn't dress that way. He said, but we just don't practice it. Like it's just whatever. And he was definitely not a pressureful type
Yeah.
of person, but I was like, more rules. Are there more rules that I'm missing out on? Because remember, I'm the constable.
Hmm.
And I think the biggest reason I was the constable was because my dad, being a narcissist and a fundamentalist, was very volatile emotionally and was abusive. And so if I could learn the rules, I felt safe. So
Yeah.
rules were very important to me. And so sure enough, we get home from the store and I get the lexicon and the concordance and all the things to help me properly understand the word of God. And sure enough, I see, oh, women are to be covering their heads when they're in prayer, and they're always to be in an attitude of prayer, and they shouldn't be wearing jewelry, and they blah 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 blah. And so I asked him, I said, well, do you mind if I start wearing a head covering? Because I feel convicted. I feel convicted
Mm.
that I should be doing this. And he's like, "Mm, okay, if you want to, it's not really a big deal." Now, I didn't have a clue how to sew. So I got my holy glue gun and I got some fabric and I put the fabric on a headband that I had. And I stopped cutting my hair, got rid of my makeup. I wasn't even wearing my wedding ring. Like I was all the way in. Didn't cut my daughter's hair, didn't let them wear pants unless it was like snow pants, or I just was completely hook, line, and sinker. And I think the people on the Bible college campus did not know what to make of it because the other women on campus were not doing that. The other student wives weren't doing that. So they could see that I was, again, getting extreme because I'm prone to extremes. In case you haven't noticed that, I'm prone to extremes. And then, yeah, so that's how I ended up doing a deep dive into the fundamentalist rabbit hole, was through the Haldeman Mennonites. And there are Haldeman Mennonites all across Canada. So that's what I did for a number of years until my husband got a pastoring job. And once we were there, he said, I think your head covering is putting a block between you and the other parishioners. And I want you to stop wearing it. And I was so bored. Oh my gosh, I cried. I wept. I
Yeah.
was so, how could he? I'm doing this to be an example. And also because the marriage wasn't naturally an easy
Mm.
fit. I also wore the head covering as a reminder to myself that I was to submit, because submission does not come naturally to me. I know that's a shock.
Yeah.
And so that was my reminder every day to be careful what I said. You defer to him,
Mm.
even when what he said was totally ridiculous. I thought that's when I especially needed to remember to submit. So anyway, stopped wearing the head covering, and then I gotta say, it was just like, and now that I'm thinking about it, I'm like, oh, that's interesting, the timing of these things. Because that same year, just a series of calamities hit our family, one thing after another. I mean, my parents separated after over 40 years. My nephew killed somebody and was on the run. And so the police contacted me, and I had to, if he showed up, I had to contact the police, all this stuff, one thing after another. And and the church wasn't really responding well to my husband as the pastor. There were
Mm.
lots of problems and lots of fires coming up, and I was the one that was having to kind of put them out.
Yeah.
So anyway, it was one thing after another. We ended up leaving the church, coming back to British Columbia. And then the last thing that happened that was really the straw that broke the camel's back is our youngest daughter was diagnosed with a life-threatening illness.
Mm.
And when that happened, I thought, I don't know anyone who has tried harder to live an exemplary Christian life. And I just was shat upon. Like it was a
Yeah.
storm, just a shitstorm all the time, all one after another. We
Yeah.
had almost no time to recover from one calamity for the next, and bankruptcy was in there, like all these things. And so, but when our girl was diagnosed, I thought, that is it. That is it. There may be a God out there somewhere, but there is no God here where I have been looking in the Christianity that I was raised with. And in that instance, even though it was terribly painful, that's when I gave myself permission to start looking elsewhere.
Yeah.
Stick my head up outside the ground and start looking and see what is there. And so I gave myself permission to check out all sorts of different, interesting and crazy and fun and wacky beliefs and
Yeah.
philosophies. And so that's what I did for a while. And then I eventually divorced my husband and my religion, and here I am.
That's a very quick hop, skip, and a jump. Um, I do want to ask though, with all of those, calamities, as you put it, up until the point of what happened with your daughter, was there a part of you that was spiritualizing all of that and going like, is this a result of me removing the head covering? Is this a result of me not living biblically enough? Or because I think we spiritualize and we see some of those things as like divine punishments, so to speak, for not doing or
Right.
living in the right way. And so
Mm-hmm.
was that
Mm-hmm.
something that was happening?
Well, definitely, I remember at some points thinking, this must be the devil is trying to
Yeah.
trick me or pull me astray.
Yeah.
Um, there
Yeah.
were some things
Spiritual
that I just
warfare.
straight up, Yeah, spiritual warfare.
Yeah.
Some things that I straight up blamed on my husband, like that I felt he was extremely difficult and whatever. And so some things I could blame on him. Some things I couldn't blame on anyone, and they made no sense. But then, of course, the Book of Job makes no sense. And so I got to a point where I didn't even feel like I could talk to anybody. And the marriage was quite unraveling quite a bit by this point. And so, as my faith was just hanging on by a thread, and finally, when I snipped that thread, I didn't even feel like I could talk to my husband about what was going on. But and we weren't going to church anymore, so I had been the one that continued dragging us all out to church.
Mm,
And then eventually the kids were like, I don't want to go, don't make me go, I hate going, I don't like it there.
yeah.
And their dad wasn't interested. And I remember making myself go one last time, and I'm sitting up in the balcony and singing hymns about how great God is, and how he loves us and everything. And they're just, the words are turning to sawdust in my mouth, and I'm weeping because my heart is just shattered. I'm so devastated and not understanding why all these things are happening. So then I stopped going, and to my great surprise, nobody noticed or nobody cared. Like nobody said thing. I think there was one person who called and warned me that I was taking my kids to hell or whatever, but everybody else is like crickets, just totally silent. And I think it's because Christians fear that apostasy might be contagious.
Yes.
Whatever happened to Janice, they did not want that to, happen in
Yeah.
their life, because it's very disruptive, like huge existential crisis. I remember feeling elated when I discovered, when the thought came to me that there's no hell. There's no hell. This is the best thing ever. And then immediately going, oh, if there's no hell, well, maybe there's no heaven. And
Yeah.
that was terribly
Yeah.
painful and scary.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you can relate to some of those thoughts too.
Yeah, especially because I think as soon as you start to unravel or deconstruct or whatever language you want to use the concept of heaven and hell, you then start asking the big existential questions of, well, if there's no heaven and hell, like, is there God? Like, and
Mhm.
that's the heaviest question of all, of like, is there a God? Because then you're not just grieving the shit you've been through, you're not just grieving the community you've lost, you're then just you're then grieving the God that you've had a personal relationship with for like,
My cosmic big brother. Yeah.
yes.
Hmm.
And so, like,
Hmm.
what was that unraveling like for you, in
Hmm.
different points?
Yeah, super duper painful
Yeah.
and confusing, and scary.
Mm.
Um, and just no, so I have, I'm close to one of my older brothers in particular. He's the one that's closest in age to me. And I knew that he had believed quite deeply, but that in his 20s he let it go. And my brothers expressed like that they were glad to see me kind of loosening up on some of my beliefs. So I felt like I could talk to them and ask them some questions. And that question in particular, about, well, oh my God, what if there's no heaven? Like, what is it? What am I even here for? What if there's no God? What is the purpose of everything?
Yeah.
And he's like, relax. He said, you're gonna be okay. In big brother fashion, he said, I've been through this too. And he said, I want you to find the Kurzgesagt channel on YouTube, and I want you to watch a video called Optimistic Nihilism. And he said, you got to watch it all the way through. It's like a 6 minute video or whatever. And so I'm like hyperventilating, and I watched the video. And by the end of the video, I was like, that actually makes sense. That I
Yeah.
do actually feel a little bit better. But it's still, even from then, it was years until I got to a point where I could say, I don't actually believe any of it. And I did quite a deep dive then in the New Age community, and
Mm.
I loved exploring all these things formerly forbidden, and my crystals and my chakras and all this stuff. And it was so interesting until someone started talking about you can channel entities from different. And I was like, oh my God, this is just too familiar. This I can't. And now here I am again. And so then I lost that community because
Yeah.
I didn't feel like I could stay, and then it was even still another few years after that that I thought, you know what, I'm doing okay on my own. I
Yeah.
don't need to subscribe to a belief system. And so I did find Dr. Marlene Winnell
Yeah.
on the internet, and Dr. Winnell's book is called Leaving the Fold.
Mm.
And I was so freaking relieved when I found this interview of her talking with someone, and she made so much sense. And she talked about religious trauma syndrome. I was like, what? What now? And she talked about it. It made so much sense. So I immediately contacted her after I saw that interview, blurted everything out. I'm a bit of a blurter sometimes. And she was so kind. And she said, read my book and come visit me in San Francisco. I'm holding retreats.
Yeah.
And so that was the next big step because I was terrified because I don't go places by myself and do things by myself. And what if this is a cult? And what if I never am heard from again?
Yeah, because you're terrified of any organized community after that point because you're like, be fucked if
Totally.
I'm letting this happen over again,
That's right.
right?
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
Yep.
it's
But what she
terrifying.
said made sense.
Yeah.
Yes. And it took all my courage to go to that event. And from the minute I walked in the door and was just met by such kind, loving people who could relate, who
Yeah.
nodded their heads in agreement, and they had come out of Jehovah's Witness and out of this and out of that, like really other hardcore belief systems that they believed 100% with all their heart. Maybe they were even missionaries or whatever, and they didn't believe it anymore. And so we're all just kind of in a huddle there, crying with each other, going, "Yeah, it really sucks, doesn't it? Yeah, it's really hard." And there was
Uh,
Marlene, just smiling at us and reassuring us, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. Other people have been through it before you. They're going to be through it after you. And so my meeting with Dr. Manel was super helpful. And then I kept in touch with her fairly closely as I went back to school to become a registered professional counselor. And then I started addressing some of my own trauma, family of origin trauma, and then really, because I didn't think really that I had too much religious trauma. And then I started when I was doing my course, I was going, oh God, okay, yeah, does all fall into place. Um, and so then I said to Dr. Winnell, is anyone doing conferences about religious trauma? She said, nope. I said, oh, guess what? I'm going to do it. Never having attended a conference, not knowing
Yeah.
anything about what has to go into putting, I was like, yeah, I'll volunteer. And so that was a very big undertaking. So I launched the Conference on Religious Trauma, also known as COURT. And then that was a big success. And I thought, well, what's going on with sexuality and purity culture? People are screwed right up by this. And so then I founded the Shameless Sexuality Life After Purity Culture Conference. Then I started the Divorcing Religion podcast, Divorcing Religion YouTube channel. Then I wrote my book. Then I was in the Leaving Jesus documentary, and it's just one thing after another. And here I am on your podcast.
And
It's
so
all been leading up to this.
yes, which is I'm going to ask because like after you like sharing all of the things that you are now involved in and after processing your own stuff, how do you not become as equally fundamental about religious trauma as you were about Christianity?
Right. Yeah. It took me a while to be willing to admit that not everybody is traumatized
Yeah.
by religion.
Yeah.
And even you can have two siblings, two people that grow up in the same family. So trauma is subjective. And whether we internalize something as traumatic has to do with a lot of other factors.
Mm.
And so that once I really recognized that was a help in letting me step back a little bit. And then also I discovered secular humanism,
Mm.
and that was I feel like that was another part of my evolution just into maturity. And the more clients also that I've worked with, and I run support groups and all these sorts of things, it becomes easier and easier to spot the dogmatic thinking,
Mm.
and the black and white rigidity, the authoritarianism. And it's one thing to leave the fundamentalist religion. It's another thing entirely to leave the mindset,
Yeah.
or be able to escape the mindset. And that typically takes people a lot longer. And this is where I think we run into issues in the recovery community for people recovering from religious trauma sometimes, because there can still be that dogmatic
Mm.
way of thinking instead of just, you know what, there's enough room for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
You get to process your trauma your own way. But so that's a harder step for people to get to. And also because we still have that, stickler for rules and
Mm.
authority, and we can always be scanning to see who's stepping out, who's not doing it the right way. So yeah, it took me a little while to get to the
Mm.
point where I'm at, which I think is far easier going. And I asked my kids, thinking back to when I was first deconstructing, and my kids were maybe like 10 and 12 or 11 and 13 or something, my daughters. And I said to them, well, I'm sure you've noticed that we're no longer going to church. And by the way, I'm playing the didgeridoo all the time, and I'm grown dreadlocks and got some tattoos. I'm like, you might say that mom's gone through some changes. And I don't believe the Bible the way that I once did. I no longer believe that it is literal. And I said, and how are you, my darlings, how are you doing with these changes? Because it's, pretty big. And they're like, you are so much easier. Which was shocking because I thought it was like the picture of an easygoing mother. And then, as they went on later through their teens, and eventually their dad and I did separate and divorce, and there was a lot of bumpiness and a lot of pain. And I ended up writing each of them a separate letter where I went through everything I could think of, that I could remember that I did that potentially impacted, that I saw showing up somehow in their life, and just to tell them how sorry I was. And it was never my intention to harm them or hurt their dad or break up our family, and that I'm just terribly sorry. And that if you ever want to ask me anything about my journey, I'll be honest with you and I'll tell you. And my kids are just so awesome. They both wrote me back separately within a few hours and said, "Oh, Mom, we just love you so much, and
Yeah.
we see you've been through a lot, and of course we forgive you."
Yeah.
And that was very healing.
Yeah.
It
Absolutely.
doesn't happen for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Oh, what a beautiful moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so their dad and I did um go our separate ways. Now none of us are religious at all. In fact, I'm the president of my local atheist skeptics and humanists group in our town.
What
Uh
a full
and
circle.
That's exactly right. But we've all stayed quite close, and so their dad has moved away to another province now. But we have a family chat where, probably every day somebody's posting something in there, and when he comes to town, he stays with me and my new husband, and like we just have a lovely friendship. And in fact, it's a much easier
Yeah.
relationship because we're not irritating each other all the time. I wasn't wishing he would be holier, and he's not feeling like he can never please me,
Yeah.
right? Because now we're just friends. He
Mm.
can do whatever cockamamie thing he wants to, and
Yep.
it's not going to impact me. I can just support him as his friend and wish him well.
Yeah. I remember something that you said at the beginning of the episode when you were little about not wanting to disappoint your parents. And so I'm curious what impact shifting from, I mean, not just shifting from Christianity to something more progressive, but shifting from Christianity to atheism slash humanism.
Mhm.
like, how did that impact your relationship with your parents?
Mhm. Yes. So, um, my parents, my dad died last year, and we were estranged at the time. Um, my mom is, I think she just turned 86 or 87, so she still would consider herself a believer. She hasn't been to church in years, but she would say to me, she was the opposite to my dad, who was so rules oriented, and she's like, "Oh, eat them meat and spit out the bones." She's like, "You
Yeah.
don't why you got to be so much like your dad? Take everything so like that." And of course, I was so much like my dad. So I really didn't talk much with my parents about it. Now, I do remember one time when they were coming to visit, and my dreadlocks were just starting to grow, and so they looked pretty weird. And also, I had a tattoo on my ankle, and so those things were new to them. And I heard them as they were coming in the entryway. My mom was whispering to my dad, like in a stage whisper, "Whatever you do, don't ask her about her hair or her tattoos."
Oh,
So it was just like the big elephant in the room that they're looking all over. They're not looking at me. But they could tell obviously that something was going on, and there were changes afoot. And finally, I did have a conversation. My mom, like I said, was always gentle, but my dad, if I was out with him somewhere and we were having a meal, he would want to stand up and pray and give thanks over the meal. So eventually I was like, don't do that. I don't believe that anymore. And of course he cried. And I'm like, well, okay, you can cry. I'm sorry that you're feeling hurt by this, but this is just how it is. And then uh eventually I said to him, you can't, I will leave if we are in public and you start making a spectacle of yourself in this way. I'm going to leave. And so that's what I had to do. And it he got the point, fairly quickly when I started following through on those things. And one time they were over for dinner, and he was saying to my daughters, who were in their late teens, "But how's your relationship with Jesus? And do you still love Jesus?" And all this. And I said at the dinner table, I said, "Stop right now. I don't give you permission to be grilling my daughters," even though my kids were like, Mom, it's okay. And I'm like, "It's not okay with me." So I said, "Dad, you can either stop and we can change the subject, or it's time for you to go." So things could get uh, kind of heated in that way. I was never yelling or anything like that. And the relationship eventually got to such a point that I said, "You know what? I can't do this
yeah,
anymore." It doesn't mean I can never do it again, but I can't do it anymore. I'm in my 50s, and I know what's good for me and what's not. And this relationship is not good for me. And so for the last 4 or 5 years, we were estranged. But I heard from my siblings when he was on his deathbed, and I thought about it and made the choice. And I went in and I sat with him. I held his hand. He couldn't, he wasn't even opening his eyes or anything, but I held his hand and I
mm,
whispered in his ear and told him that I was there, and I loved him, and
yeah,
was okay for him to let go, that sort of thing. And he started breathing quite heavier, like that. I knew he could tell that I was there with him. So that is, what it is. I do not regret.
yeah,
I don't regret it. My life looks the way that I want my life to look. It's sometimes messy, and it doesn't look the way that I thought it would, but to me it's beautiful.
yeah. And it's such a huge estrangement is something that, people talk about and they go, how can people do that? But and especially in this space, I think it is such a huge choice to make when you have been in a system that praises not having boundaries, essentially. Like it is about
Mhm.
like high control religion is like boundaryless relationships. And so to actually put a boundary in place with someone, not just anyone, but a parent who you are also supposed to just like honor and respect, irrespective of anything
Yeah,
else,
the
it's
patriarch.
huge. Yeah.
Yeah, 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 it was. What finally had brought it on. So I had gone out of my way to try and be a good daughter, even in the midst of all these things. So he was divorced from my mom. So, he needed groceries, he needed this, he needed that. And it was always just one more thing, very lots of drama, high drama. And what had never been addressed was that he a couple of times had been inappropriate with me when I was 10 or 11, so just going through puberty. And I never brought it up, never said anything except I told one or two of my little girlfriends at the time. And I never talked about it or anything. And then as this pressure kept mounting with my dad and his demands were getting more and more, and one of my brothers said, well, you're going to have to take over and become his power of attorney. And it's just like something flipped. And I said, no, because you know why? Here's what happened. And my family was
Yeah.
dumbfounded. They couldn't believe it. And I said, I know it's true because I told these people and I checked in with those girls and said, I didn't just imagine this, did I? And they said, no, we remember you talking about it. Um, and so that just was such a weight
Mm.
off my shoulders. But it was also very hard because then I felt like the family I was harming the family. That was
Yeah.
the feeling. One of my siblings said, why'd you wait till now? You could have told us sooner. None of us would have had to live with him, like then. So there's the victim blaming. And I said, well, I was 10. So it's at 10 years old, it's kind of hard to always know what's the right course of action. I was just embarrassed. I didn't want to have to talk with anybody about it. So yeah, it was difficult. But again, I I know what works for me. I know what's healthy for me and what's not healthy. And I was done carrying that secret
Yeah.
and that burden. So, mhm.
Oh, I'm equally so sorry and also so happy that you were able to come back to yourself and be able to choose what was right and good and safe for you. So I love
Thank
that.
you. Thank you. Yes. And my mom, we have quite a lovely relationship. She only lives about 15 minutes away, which is just wonderful.
Mm.
And she knows about my book. And
Yeah.
she was saying, I want your book. I want to get a copy of your book. And first I said, absolutely not. She said, I want your book. And I said, Mom, let me put it this way. It's not going to bless you. It's not really going to bless you. And she said, my daughter wrote a best-selling book and I want to have it on my shelf. And then I was like, how can you turn down that? So
Yeah.
I
How do you say
wrote in
no?
there. So I said, Mom, I love you. Thanks for always loving me. And
Oh,
uh, and then I gave it to her, and we've never talked about it. And
yeah.
so we just are very gentle with each other.
Mm.
He's gonna be dead soon. I
Yeah.
mean, she's like in her late 80s. I want her sliding into home plate with no worries. I do not want her having an existential crisis. If she's in the hospital and asks me to come sing a hymn, yes, I'll sing a hymn. But
Yeah.
like it doesn't matter to me if
Yeah.
it will bring comfort to her,
Yeah.
then that's what I want to do. So we just treat each other with great kindness and always afford each other dignity.
Yeah. It's beautiful. Yeah. And so I love asking this question to a lot of the people on the podcast because I get the most diverse answers from everybody because everybody is in such different spaces after going through what they've been through. And so, what is your relationship with spirituality or the lack of it?
Yes. Yeah, that's a great question because there's so many diverse
Yeah.
answers. And I would say what resonates with me the most now is the philosophy of naturalism. So
Mm,
I don't see supernatural anything in the
hmm.
world at this point. I see things either that are currently explained by a scientific view, or that one day probably will be. So
Yeah.
I don't, because I used to be very God of the gaps, got my air quotes going there. So if I don't understand it, if it's a mystery, it's the God of the gaps. I don't understand it, so it must be God. Now I'm more interested in evidence and especially since COVID and really this whole misinformation coming to the forefront. So critical thinking, very important to me right now. And that's something that I wasn't trained to do, to think critically. So I love to tell people to go to the website, Thinking is Power. I think
Mm,
it's thinkingispower.com. It's a wonderful website all about helping people to think critically. So, and that's what I work with my clients and encourage them to
yeah.
do as well. But some people, they're holding on to that, magical thinking or hope or whatever you want to call it, because they really, at that point in their life, still need it. I
Mm,
don't want to pull that away from
yeah.
somebody. People, deconstruction and deconversion is very individual.
Mm,
I'm not going in yanking people out of the pews. I'm standing outside the church with my arms stretched out. So when people are thrown out or fall out or tumble down the steps, I can catch them and say, "You're going to be okay."
yeah. Oh, that's a really beautiful imagery of like someone being thrown out and being someone they're waiting, going, "Hey, I'm here. You're not alone. You can do this. We can do this." Like it is the most soft landing analogy I've heard in a while. That's beautiful. Um,
Good. I wish someone had been there for me. Like
yeah.
I was so lonely as I was trying to
Yeah.
figure it out because I didn't know anybody else who'd been as devout a believer and then walked away from it and lived like a perfectly happy,
Mm,
successful life. Because of course the fear is you're going to end up in the gutter or whatever. So it was years between my when I stopped attending services and when I found Dr. Winnell. And then, of course, I became well acquainted with Dr. Daryl Ray, and Daryl founded Recovering from Religion. And I understand they have an office, I think, in Australia now, too. So, recoveringfromreligion.org is another very helpful
mm,
community and organization for people who are wondering if maybe they're even just questioning their beliefs. Maybe they haven't even left, or maybe they have left and they're looking for support. So I can't say enough good things about Recovering from Religion. It's a great group.
yeah. And getting unique support in this space is so important, which, it's part of the reason why me and, Jane and Elise, a couple of colleagues, founded the Religious Trauma Collective in our part of the world because we just were having people sit in our office and in our rooms going, this other practitioner said I had to do this or I had to do that, or they had a faith-based therapist or something like
Oh,
that who
or there was a
been there.
Bible verse on the wall.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so it was like there is such a need for people to land in spaces where they can ask the questions and they don't need to worry about finding the answer just yet. Just asking the question is enough for right now and not have someone prescribe them an answer and understand the unique experience that this type of trauma brings someone. And so it is, yeah. I love chatting to people who work in this space as well because it is such a unique experience working in the space and having lived experience. And so I'm curious how you navigate that for yourself.
Yeah. Well, sometimes a client is sharing something with me and it really does hit
Mm,
close to home because I
yeah.
recognize I've had a similar experience. Um, and I think it's okay in those times
Yeah.
for me to say, as a clinician, wow, that hits close to home.
Mm,
Tell me more. How did it feel for you? Just making sure it's not staying on us, but that
yeah.
it's always about the client, which is why we also as clinicians need to have other clinicians, people that we turn to, that we're going to, so we're not, getting re-traumatized and vicarious trauma and all that kind of stuff. One thing, I don't know if you run into this, but I have, where people say, well, religious trauma, what does that just mean? A priest, is harassing a child, and I'm like, well, that definitely is
Yeah.
trauma that is occurring within a religious context, but it's so much more than that. And now, finally, religious trauma and religious trauma syndrome kind of making their way into the larger consciousness. It's very exciting to be in these times where people are learning about it. And the things I hear from people, the loss of community
Yeah.
is substantial because it's a one-stop shop. All your needs are met in that religious community. The only thing that comes close is the military
Yes.
because they are comrades in arms. So they're singing together, marching together, eating together, protecting each other. Otherwise, life becomes this patchwork quilt. You're grabbing from your book club friends and your cycling friends and and it doesn't feel the same and it requires work,
Hmm.
more work. So the loss of community,
Yeah.
loss of identity
Yeah.
is huge. That's a hard one for people. A loss of purpose
Yeah.
because they believe they had this cosmic divine purpose, and it can be a dangerous time when people lose that. So encouraging people that we must mature from meaning seekers into meaning makers.
Yeah.
Now you're the one that gets to decide. And of course, then the sexuality piece of it, because there can be so much shame from purity culture. So
Yeah.
those are the main things that I find people are coming to me
Yeah.
and struggling with and wanting help with.
Yeah. Which is a nice transition into, I love when nice transitions happen. And I don't need to
Yay.
make it up on the spot. Into what I always finish these episodes with, which is just some encouragement for listeners who might be in the thick of everything that you just described, or they might be at the very beginning of it, or 30 years down the track. But what would you say to someone who feels like they are fresh in this space?
Hmm. Um, you're not alone. You're
Mm,
in very, very good company. Like I said before, other people have come before you who've had these, had to meet these struggles, and there will be people after you as well, because it's part of the human condition.
mm,
So reach out to a qualified secular therapist, someone who will listen and like you said, not be prescribing that you have to do it like this
yeah,
and like this, but you need someone that can listen and provide space for you to unpack these things. And and life is like a buffet table, so there are all these delectable dishes which are experiences set out before us. Religious people will starve to death at that table because they don't let themselves eat. So you are allowed to take a bite of every dish on the table as long as you're not breaking the law of the land or harming another person. That's a pretty big amount of space
yeah,
that you can try. You're allowed to be free. And freedom can be terrifying, but it also is so wonderful. So
yeah,
I invite you just to keep going. Just take one step after another and be courageous and be curious.
yeah. Curiosity is my favorite thing now. It is, I think curiosity is the key to so many different spaces. So I love that that's the thing that you ended on. I love that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for
Awesome.
joining me. And thank you for all of the
Oh,
work
my
that you've
pleasure.
done in this space as well. There is a real shift happening, and it is exciting to be a part of it. And I love chatting with people who are on the other side of the world who are doing similar things to us over here, and yet completely different cultural landscapes, and yet we have so much in common. Not the things that we would love to have in common, but yet it's still commonalities.
Yes. Yes, yes, absolutely. And
Yeah.
I'd love to come back and join you another time if you're interested. One of the things we didn't talk about was how my sister came to live with us, and she is a First Nations person. So we have some similarities in Canada, unfortunately, between how we've treated our First Nations people and how First Nations people in your part of the world have been treated. And of course, she ended up being placed in our evangelical white family. So that's a
Oh,
whole additional um,
yeah.
piece. I'm so fortunate to still have her in my life and call her my sister, and she calls me her sister. So
Beautiful.
it's a painful but a powerful story.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for sharing. I appreciate your time and your energy and your vulnerability I understand how taxing it is to share our stories time and time again. So I'm so appreciative of you joining me.
My pleasure. And if people want to find out more about my work, they can go to
Okay.
divorcingreligion.com. My book is Divorcing Religion, a Memoir and Survival Handbook. And my YouTube channel is also called Divorcing Religion. And to you, I say lim limt, which means thank you
Oh,
in the Syilx language.
beautiful. And all of that will be in the show notes as well, so people can easily go wherever they would like to go and to connect with you in all of the variety of different ways. So thank you.
Yes.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Beyond the Surface. I hope you found today's conversation as insightful and inspiring as I did. If you enjoyed the episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with others who might benefit from these stories. Stay connected with us on social media for updates and more content. I love connecting with all of you. Remember, no matter where you are in your journey, you're not alone. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep moving forward. Take care.